something we've been waiting for all weekend. We expected to hear a number, and we didn't hear a number.
That's right.
It's supposed to be the troop strength increase speech, and if it was that, you have to kind of find it between the lines somewhere.
I mean, we heard from the president tonight an argument with his old self.
Yes.
Who was very much against the war in Afghanistan and wanted us to be out not just today, but yesterday, and constantly called it a waste, including a waste of American lives, which is a very dicey thing to say about a war where people are still dying. So we heard the president basically dismiss his previous self in those previous arguments and explain why we need a more George W. Bush approach to this war going forward. I mean, we'll see what this meant. I still don't understand exactly why he made this announcement now, and I don't know exactly what this means except for the threat to Pakistan and my worries about what's going to happen because of that next.
And it does seem that on the timing, Rachel, that it may have been rushed or speeded up because Mike Pence was on a scheduled trip in South America that he had to come back for in order to be in these meetings leading up to this speech. Now, the vice president's schedule was known well in advance. If this speech was supposed to be scheduled for tonight, then the trip could have been adjusted quite a while ago.
And it doesn't. Yes, you're totally right about Pence. Pence was on this overseas trip. It was scheduled to go through Friday. He had to come back early in order to go to that Camp David meeting on Afghanistan. The day after that, on Saturday, they announced that they were going to do this speech tonight. But this speech tonight comes at a weird time. I mean, not to be too granular about this, but the whole country spent the day staring at the sun, being awed by the majesty of the solar system, and then we're finishing. So then at the end of that night, including a White House event to highlight the fact that the president was also watching the eclipse, sometimes without glasses, we get this speech on Afghanistan. And tonight is the eve of his big campaign-style rally tomorrow in Phoenix, where he may be issuing the first presidential pardon of his term to disgraced former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So if he's trying to do this for political effect, and it doesn't seem to be driven by circumstances on the ground, the political effect here is kaleidoscopic.
And interestingly, he seems to have no one on board at the moment to back up what he said tonight. Defense Secretary is out of the country. What you'd expect as the next stage of discussion of this from the administration, we might not be getting.
And there aren't people at the State Department who work on this stuff in place as confirmed positions, and the main civilian position in U.S. government to focus on Afghanistan and Pakistan together is a person who just finished in June, wasn't replaced. They quietly closed the office the day that she left and never told any of the staff who worked in that office that they were closing the office until it was closed. Never a press release, no statement about doing that whatsoever. So if something has changed, we've just started a new fight with Pakistan. Okay, who's gonna follow through on that? I mean, maybe it'll be on Jared's plate.
Great job covering the live speech, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Well, it was a speech like no other. Trump administration sources had indicated that the president was going to announce a 50% increase in troop strength in Afghanistan by sending an additional 4,000 troops to Afghanistan. Tonight, the president announced that he will not announce an increase in troop strength.
A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. I've said it many times, how counterproductive it is for the United States to announce in advance the dates we intend to begin or end military options. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities.
We will not talk about numbers of troops. That is new for the American presidency. At no point tonight did the president clarify anything about what would actually change militarily for the United States in Afghanistan. If this speech is meant to be interpreted as an increase in troop strength in Afghanistan, it is the first time a president has announced an increase in troop strength without actually announcing an increase in troop strength.
As Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. After 18 months, our troops will begin to come home. These are the resources that we need to seize the initiative while building the Afghan capacity that can allow for a responsible transition of our forces out of Afghanistan.
And here is how President George W. Bush described the military surge that he ordered in Iraq.
So I've committed more than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. The vast majority of them, 5 brigades, will be deployed to Baghdad.
Here is President Lyndon Johnson announcing increased deployments to Vietnam.
I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately. Additional forces will be needed later, and they will be sent as requested.
We, of course, lost the Vietnam War, which is a piece of our history which seems to be lost to President Trump.
In every generation, we have faced down evil, and we have always prevailed of our enemies and the arrival of peace.
Joining us now, Evan McMullin, former CIA operative. He is the co-founder of Stand Up Republic. Also with us, David Rothkopf, columnist for The Washington Post. He's a visiting professor at Columbia University and a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. David, the arrival of peace.
Well, this was the illusion of action. This was the president taking one of the gravest things that a president can do, which is order troops into battle or oversee a war, and essentially use it as a cloak for changing the political discussion in the United States. You know it was a cloak because, as you said, there was no announcement of numbers in it. In fact, he talked about a strategy, but there was no strategy there. He talked about a commitment, but there was no commitment there. He talked about a change, but there was no real change in what he was talking about. And he talked about principled realism. Without principles or without a realistic view towards what would be necessary to achieve what he talked about, which was victory. We're not going to achieve any kind of victory in Afghanistan. As it happens, Trump was probably right on the campaign trail. This is not a place where we are going to succeed, and we should probably try to figure out how to get out of there as quickly as we can. But he brought this up tonight, and as you say, he did so in a way that rushed Pence in. And we have to ask, why did he do it? He did it to change the conversation. He did it to get away from his disaster of last week. And he did it in a way that brought that up, because if you listen to the first part of the speech, what did you hear? We want to fight against bigotry. We are one people. We must be tolerant. We are fighting for each other. He ignored the fact that he wants to kick LGBT troops out of the military, and he ignored the fact that the principal agitator for divisions in the United States of America right now is the President of the United States.
Evan, on this point of troop numbers, as we just saw in that quick review of presidential announcements, there's always been two reasons for it. One, in a democracy, it is believed that the public has a right to know how many lives are being put at risk. And two, part of this announcement, these announcements historically, have been intended to scare the enemy. They expect the enemy to be scared with this, by this new commitment, by the new number of troops that are coming. If the president is afraid to mention the number, it would seem the president doesn't believe he has a number that can scare anyone on the other end.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right about that. And so by not naming a number, it may have been the right thing to do if you're just optimizing for impact on the ground in Afghanistan vis-a-vis the enemy. But I agree it makes it very difficult then for the American people to understand what their government is doing in a war and then to therefore hold their leaders accountable. I do think, though, that I would try not to be too cynical about this. I understand how the president certainly may have been motivated to change the topic. All the other topics these days are pretty bad for him. But the truth is, the president, whoever it is, did need to come out and make a statement on Afghanistan and give some sort of direction as to where we're headed, even if the details are slim. And I think the speech, while good, it was scripted Trump. It was very slim on details. I do support the idea that we've got to move towards a condition-based approach, not a time-based approach. I don't think it's necessary, therefore, though, that we don't articulate the numbers that we're actually sending to Afghanistan. Those will become known over time, whether it's a large number or it's just a few thousand. But yeah, I think we should avoid being too cynical. There was a need for the president, whoever it is, to articulate some sort of direction here.
David, in the avoidance of being cynical, let's just point out some facts here. The president did say, in the end, we will win. So that's a marker for us. He said that the arrival of peace in Afghanistan will be the definition of us winning. And then to the complexity of adding India into this speech, which if you try to figure out why India is there, it might have something to do with justifying the title of his speech being about Afghanistan and South Asia. Part of what he said about India was that he would get India to help us more with Pakistan on economic development and assistance. He's going to get India to help Pakistan on economic development and assistance.
Well, certainly if there was something big in the speech in a foreign policy sense, it was the sense that he said, look, I'm going to bring India into it. We're going to try to get India involved in this stuff. Obviously, as you say, and I can see the hint of the smile there on your lips, the notion that somehow we're going to get India to help Pakistan much with economic development, or that we're going to get India more involved in Afghanistan without inflaming Pakistan is ludicrous. It's made more ludicrous by the fact that there used to be an office in the State Department that dealt with this, that he shut down unceremoniously. It's made more ludicrous by the fact that when he talked about economic development in this speech and he talked about political solutions, he hasn't staffed the top people in the State Department who are supposed to achieve those things. And he has talked about cutting back on development and other budgets that are necessary to achieve those things. So on the one hand, he's changing U.S. foreign policy in a way it can't and probably shouldn't be changed. And on the other hand, he's promising to do things that he himself is the principal agitator against in terms of cutting staff or cutting funding.
The notion of India helping Pakistan is a new presidential. Every previous president has understood that the presidential mission is to prevent them from going to war with each other. Let's listen to what, David, you referred to what the president had said during the campaign. Let's listen to some of that.
I know more about ISIS than the generals do. So a general gets on, sent obviously by Obama, and he said, Mr. Trump doesn't understand. He knows nothing about defense. I know more about offense and defense than they will ever understand, believe me. And they will never.
Evan McMullin, he didn't sound tonight like someone who knows more about offense and defense militarily than the generals.
Well, no, instead, he looks like he's taking his general's advice. And I think that's a good thing. I think we should be pleased that he's doing that rather than coming up with his own plan, which in my view would have been disastrous, because his plan would have been a sudden withdrawal and a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. I agree that we're not looking at anything here that seems like a happy victory anytime soon. But an abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan would put us at risk. Al-Qaeda is still there, planning and plotting. The Taliban controls 30 to 40% of Afghanistan, more than they've controlled in years. I wouldn't advocate for a wholesale occupation of Afghanistan, something that large scale. But we've got to have a presence there that's capable of pushing back against the rise of international terrorist groups who are still plotting against our country and against our allies.
But David, did the president threaten an abrupt withdrawal or a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan when he said to Afghanistan tonight, our commitment is not unlimited, our patience is not unlimited?
Well, he said that could happen at any time. In fact, he said it's conditions based, and if the conditions turn bad, Trump might cut and run. And of course, that's traditional for Trump. I think one of the things that's striking, and I'm picking up on what Evan said, the generals had a different view from Trump, but he didn't exactly take the advice of the generals. He said, We may increase, we may not increase, we may be there for a while, we may not be there for a while. He didn't actually embrace anything in this speech except the notion that we will continue to be in this situation that he said we wouldn't be in anymore.
Well, it's the second stage of reporting on this, which I'm sure will start late tonight or tomorrow. It will be leaks from inside the Trump administration about exactly what the troop increase is going to be, when it's going to happen, all of that. That'll all have to come through leaks because it wasn't in the presidential speech. David Rothkopf and Evan Mullin, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, tonight's announcement just might help President Trump move past his disastrous week last week.
Foreign Affairs correspondent, the host of Andrea Mitchell Reports here on MSNBC. Andrea, thank you for being with us tonight. I know it's a busy night for you. I want to ask you about the president's remarks toward Pakistan tonight. Those are the things that struck me as a change in American international relations, in the sense that the president insulted Pakistan to my ear when he said that Pakistan needs to demonstrate that it is committed to civilization, order, and peace. Telling a country that they're not committed to civilization is essentially calling them barbarians. I doubt that will be well received. And then he immediately followed it by saying, and we would like more direct involvement in Afghanistan from India, which of course will raise hackles in the Pakistani government because of the fraught relationship between those two countries. That seems to me like the biggest change diplomatically and in international relations tonight. Can I ask your reaction to that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what leaped out at me, because American diplomats and presidents have made a pact, really, for decades. You don't go to Pakistan without also going to India. It's been this even-handed approach. You've got two nuclear-armed states. They have fought so many wars between them. And the fact is, this is a direct insult to Pakistan, which, frankly, deserves the insult because they protect and shelter the Haqqani network. But by bringing... First of all, laying Pakistan, the responsibility on Pakistan to do something about their terrorism. It's not usually done this openly. And by bringing India into it, it is such an insult, it's such a provocation that I can't see what the incentive would be for Pakistan to take any action. They now have their pride and their authority, their nationhood, challenged by the president. So it is a strange way to try to expand the strategy to include all of South Asia.
And in terms of the U.S. government and its orientation on these issues, the president didn't appoint a random crony or fundraiser to be ambassador to Pakistan. There's a career foreign service person who has been named as the ambassador to Pakistan. That seems like a gesture towards stability, at least in that relationship. That said, he dissolved the special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is an envoy, sort of a super envoy position that existed throughout the Obama administration. And then we've seen such major changes at the State Department, including not staffing up even the senior ranks of that agency. If a new big fight with a nuclear power has just been picked by the president, how is that going to be staffed and handled by this administration?
Well, it isn't staffed and it isn't handled. You've got just a handful of people in position, not really able to cope with this kind of thing. The fact is also that when he says no more nation building, Rachel, there has been a positive effect from what both Presidents Bush and Obama did. Now, a lot of that has gone down the drain in the last couple of years as the Taliban has reclaimed territory. There's no question that we are losing, that we're not just in stalemate, that the good guys are actually falling behind, and that there is corruption in Kabul. In the past, you did hear this against Karzai, but you had not heard it against this government in Kabul. So that is also picking at a sore. But I don't see what the change is, other than what Courtney said. He deliberately gave Mattis, Nicholson, and the other generals the ability to decide on future deployments. Mattis, I think very smartly, did not accept it by delaying this until there was a review and getting the president's buy-in. I think the biggest change may be that they have persuaded over these many meetings and many arguments to get the president to go against his own grain, to go against his instincts, to go against Steve Bannon, if you will, and to make a decision that is more in line with what his generals believe necessary, which is not a complete withdrawal, and certainly not hiring Erik Prince for $10 billion a year to bring his mercenaries in and turn it over to the private sector. So that is where his head was and his heart. And they have now reeled him in, and he is now going along with Nicholson, whom he publicly criticized, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Mattis, and H.R. McMaster. And, of course, John Kelly, for whom Afghanistan is such an emotional challenge, given the fact that he lost his son after the Obama increase to 30,000 troops, and that he has another Marine son either deploying or about to be deployed.
Yeah, that human connection for some of the key decision makers here is absolutely, absolutely key. Andrea Mitchell, NBC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. Pleasure and an honor to have you here with us tonight, Andrea. Thank you so much. Joining us now here in studio is Andrew Exum. He's a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. In 2009, he served as an advisor to General Stanley McChrystal. He's a contributing editor at The Atlantic magazine now. Mr. Exum, it's great to have you here. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Let me ask your top-line reaction to the speech tonight.
Yeah, I think you hit it. I mean, there's not a really big policy change. The big shift here is where the president's been. So he has been down on this war, and now he's the president and has to confront a series of some really bad options in Afghanistan. And I think the biggest takeaway is that he has now taken ownership of this war. To a certain degree, Mattis insisted on that. This was not going to be something he just delegated to the generals and could then blame on the generals. Yeah. And now he has ownership of it. I think the Pakistan stuff, that could be significant. We'll see. It's certainly going to cause ripples. My question, and I hate to go straight to the operational side of things, but so many of our lines of communication and resupply run through Pakistan. It'll be interesting to see how they thread that needle. On the one hand, dependent on Pakistan for a lot of our logistics. On the other hand, calling them and taking them to task, quite frankly, fairly as well for their support for the Haqqani network and for other organizations.
It was interesting today when we got some of the supporting reporting around what was going on in the administration to prepare for this speech. And we got word that the vice president was speaking with the Afghan president, and that Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, was speaking with his equal number in Afghanistan and in India and in Pakistan. And I thought, we're going to Pakistan in this subject. I mean, is this the sort of thing where are our relations with Pakistan so tender and fragile that bellicose words like this from the president can really screw things up? Or do they expect that has to happen in our politics, and they think that the real conversations happen on a private line with Rex Tillerson?
I don't know. I quite frankly, I'd have to defer to a real specialist in Pakistani politics. I'll say this, and having spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, we have often called out the Pakistanis privately. We have often, used the levers that we have in terms of the military aid that we give them to try to pressure them into changing their behavior in Afghanistan. That hasn't worked. It's been 16 years. And so you get the sense that the Trump administration and many of the key leaders in the military are willing to try something different. Again, I think that carries huge risks. But I also have to see just exactly what this is. I mean, if I look at the actual policy that the Obama administration had towards the war in Afghanistan, it's not that much different from what we heard tonight. So I think we have to figure out, what the president said is going to be really significant and what is going to be a change and what's going to be different. I think you were exactly right to highlight the way in which the president called out India and wanting India to play a larger role in Afghanistan. This, of course, is will trigger all of the gravest fears within the Pakistani military and within the Pakistani deep state.
Yeah.
So,
well, one last question for you. Sure. The issue about that Andrea raised at the end of her comments there about the privatization plan that we'd heard floated. I mean, I won't believe it's dead till I see a stake in its heart. But is it possible? I mean, if they really are considering taking the U.S. military out and putting in thousands of private contractors under Erik Prince's leadership to run this as a for-profit private enterprise, how far outside the realm of possibility is that, as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we should be first off, let's not hold the president to task for wanting to go back to first principles and wanting to see every available option, because goodness knows, after 16 years, and he's coming in with a fresh set of eyes, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. I think any president would want to see the full range of options. I also think it's very warming that both Secretary Mattis and General McMaster, the National Security Advisor, heard out Erik Prince in terms of his plan and promptly said no. no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to outsource our war fighting to private industry, and I think that was a positive. I mean, I would have been very worried about the fabric of our country going forward had we done that.
Yeah. Thank you for your time on that one. It was a heartening thing. Andrew Exum, an Afghan war veteran, contributing editor at the Atlantic magazine now. Andrew, it's great to have you.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, joining us now is Philip Carter. He's an Iraq war veteran, and he's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense who spent considerable time in Afghanistan in that role. He's now a senior fellow at the Center for New American Security. Mr. Carter, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thanks, Rachel.
Let me ask you the same first question I asked Andrew Exum, just your top-line reaction to what the president said tonight.
You bet. So I think what we heard tonight was a formula for forever war. You heard the shift from a time-based strategy to a conditions-based strategy, very opaque speech with respect to details, objectives, goals, and troop levels, and a seeming commitment to fight as long as necessary for what Trump called a, quote, honorable and enduring outcome, but no real detail as to what that might be.
Would the president have been able to say anything tonight that would have given you confidence that he knew how to change the course of the war in Afghanistan?
It's been a really long war, and so we've heard a lot of strategy so far. I think what would have been helpful here is to hear about the trade-offs he made. Why abandon nation building? Why focus on counterterrorism? And also, what is our purpose? What is the thing that keeps us going after spending so much blood and treasure? That's not just important for us. You heard he harangued our allies and said, you know, you have to invest more too. A more inspiring statement of purpose might do more to bring along the allies who have sacrificed so much with us in Afghanistan.
Do you think there needs to be a change in resources to better support the U.S. troops that are there in whatever numbers? Again, there's about 8,500 American service members there now. That number may be going up, although we didn't hear that tonight. Do resource levels need to change too?
Resources have to go along with what your goals are. If there's a disconnect there, your strategy will fail. We did not hear anything about resources. It's been reported that they might add about 4,000 troops, bringing us up to somewhere around 13,000. It's unclear what 13,000 troops could accomplish in Afghanistan that 100,000 could not accomplish several years ago under President Obama.
Philip Carter, really appreciate your time tonight, experience as a combat advisor, and now serving as a senior fellow at the Center for New American Security. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us now is my friend Chris Matthews, who is the host of Hardball, who I want to speak to every night there is a big speech in the world.
Thank you.
Chris, let me get your top-line response. What did you think about tonight?
Well, I listened to it closely, and as all your previous guests were, they're all excellent. I thought Michael Beschloss started the ball rolling with the historic thing, as well as you did earlier than that. Look, I think there's two kinds of wars we're familiar with, and you got to know which one you're in. A war of annihilation, like we went to Berlin. The Red Army took over Berlin. We won the war. We dropped the 2 bombs in Japan. We won that war. Those sides collapsed. They were finished. Unconditional surrender. The other kind of war we're unfortunately familiar with is wars of attrition, where one side tries to wear down the other side. And tonight, I think the president admitted that that is the kind of war he wants here. He said, our goal is to prevent the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, to prevent them, a holding action. In other words, we're not going to annihilate the Taliban. They're going to be there in perpetuity. Our question is, when are we going to leave? And my question then for the president is, when we leave, they take over. He talked about the evils of ISIS and al-Qaeda. We know all that. But what we're fighting over there is we're fighting the Taliban. That's what the Afghan government is fighting. It's what we're going to be fighting. Whether it's a private army, an outsourced army, or a U.S. army, we're fighting the Taliban. And he says his only goal was to prevent them from taking over while we're there. We're going to leave. They're going to stay. You can figure it out. We've been through this with Vietnam. The local people always win wars of attrition because eventually the great power goes home. Now, he says he wants an enduring outcome. Does that mean we stay?
Chris,
we just stay? I think that's the great question.
When he talked about, Courtney Kuby raised this issue at the end of her remarks when we had her on earlier. She said, when the president said, basically, we're going to stay until we see real results from the Afghan government, until we see the Afghan government show real reform and real results. I think she's highlighting that point in the speech because that seems like a thing that, if that's going to be the predicate for America doing anything, that is a recipe for us continuing to do what we're doing now forever. Because
I think, I'm sorry, you had me on to give the politics, and I think you know the politics. I heard you earlier tonight. You know the politics. It is that no president wants to admit defeat or be responsible for, quote, losing a country, whether it's China or whoever, Vietnam, losing Afghanistan as if we ever really had it. So that sets up a predicate. You must stay long enough to survive your own political term, your tenure of office. If it's one term for Trump, he'll want to stay until 2020. If he gets reelected, who knows? He wants to stay until 2024. That's the political imperative. Don't be on watch when we lose. We saw that with, you went through the history, went through this with Jack Kennedy, with Lyndon Johnson, with Richard Nixon in Vietnam, and then, of course, with W, and then on through Obama in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we have this president on watch. He doesn't want to lose while it's on his watch. So he says, while he's in office, this is what he said tonight, while we're there, under my watch and my leadership, we will prevent the takeover of the Taliban of Afghanistan. Yeah, we can probably do that as long as we're there. But the question is, if we're ever going to leave, when? And if we're ever going to leave, why not now? When? What's going to really change? Because as long as the Taliban's in the field against an Afghan government, who are you going to bet on? I would bet on the Taliban. They're the most zealous, the most ruthless, the most frightening. They really want to win, and they're winning right now without us upgrading our force. And if we go to 4,000 more American troops over there, making it a 50% hike in what we have, is that going to stop them from winning? Perhaps for a few years, long enough for Trump to face re-election. But a lot of lives will be lost on our side. A lot of people we will kill. And I don't think it's morally justified to stay in a war to keep somebody's political scalp from being taken.
Chris Matthews, the host of Hardball here on MSNBC. Thank you, my friend. I'm really glad you're here with us tonight.
Thank you.
To Chris's point there about the equilibrium in Afghanistan, I mean, the pointed nature of the president's comments tonight on Pakistan, set off alarm bells for a lot of reasons. Pakistan is a big nuclear-armed country. Pakistan is ostensibly our ally. It also remains true that while we support the sort of anti-Taliban side in Afghanistan, they support the Taliban, and that has long been true. And that's true also of all the attendant groups aside from the Taliban that have killed so many Americans over these long years that we've been in Afghanistan. So if the president wants to dramatically change our relationship and our stance toward Pakistan, that potentially could be very, very consequential. We have to believe, though, that he knows what he's doing. He has a plan for how to capitalize on the upset he's about to cause in that country, and he has the means, the intellectual firepower and the personnel to follow it up and make sure that ends in something constructive and not in disaster. That's next. Our coverage of the president's announcement about Afghanistan continues on this network with Lawrence O'Donnell in the next hour, and then we're going to have Brian Williams here live in the 11th hour, and then I will be back with a special live edition of The Rachel Maddow Show at midnight on the East Coast, 9 p.m. if you're joining us on the West Coast. I will see you then. Our coverage continues now with Lawrence O'Donnell.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Welcome to Inside Politics. Thanks for sharing your day with us. I'm Manu Raju. John King is off. President Trump returns to Washington, set to make a critical address to the nation. His outline for the future of America's longest war, right as he needs a commander-in-chief moment.
The president has made a decision, as he said. He wants to be the one to announce it to the American people, so I'll stand silent until then, until that point.
Plus, Steve Bannon locked and loaded and free with his hands, quote, back on his weapons. President Trump's exiled chief strategist vows not to go quietly into that good night. Then, total, beautiful, and a little dangerous. The moon does something it hasn't since 1918. Black out the sun. We'll tell you how to catch a glimpse of history. With us to share their reporting and their insights, Julie Davis of the New York Times, Jonathan Martin of the New York Times, Jeff Mason of Reuters, and CNN's MJ Lee. President Trump is back at work, preparing a primetime address with huge stakes and even bigger consequences. Tonight at 9 p.m., the president will lay out how the United States will keep fighting America's longest war. Candidate Trump ran on the promise to pull out a combat-fatigued country out of Afghanistan. But President Trump does not want history to label him as the commander-in-chief who ceded the country to terrorists. His policy will be defining, and any successes or missteps will echo for a generation. But the politics of the moment could rescue a presidency crippled by the president's response to Charlottesville. One of the telling signs of the times, this non-denial from the Republican governor of Ohio when asked by Jake Tapper if he plans to primary the sitting president.
I don't have any plans to do anything like that. I'm rooting for him to get it together. We all are. I mean, we're only like 7 months into this presidency.
Then this morning, the senior Republican senator says she cannot say if Trump will be the nominee in 2020.
Do you think he will end up the party's nominee in 2020?
It's too difficult to say.
Julie, President Trump, we have not seen him since that erratic press conference last week. There were no administration officials on any of the Sunday shows yesterday defending the president, yet you're hearing these criticisms from prominent people within the party. What is the White House's strategy here to turn the corner after Charlottesville? Is it just to ignore what happened in hopes the news cycle changes?
Well, I mean, I think they're hoping certainly for a reset after the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's easy to forget he's actually been on vacation for the last couple of weeks, and this has been an eventful vacation for him in all the negative ways. So I think starting with the speech tonight on Afghanistan, they're really hoping that he can sort of focus on that message. As he said, though, it's a difficult message for him. He's sort of, by agreeing to send more troops and talking about the engagement in Afghanistan, he's doing something that he said as a candidate he didn't want to do. He said we shouldn't be in Afghanistan. So they're hoping for a reset, but the message that he has going into the fall is a difficult one for him. I think they're really hoping when Congress comes back that if they can focus on tax policy and a tax cut, that might play things forward a little bit in a positive way. But we've got a few weeks yet before to see if whether he can regain his footing.
And the specter of Charlottesville continues to loom over this president who has not answered questions. The White House has not answered questions after that. His incredibly controversial remarks last week. Just listen to Tim Scott here, the South Carolina Republican senator, the lone African-American Republican senator, saying this when asked about Charlottesville yesterday.
As we look to the future, it's going to be very difficult for this president to lead if, in fact, that moral authority remains compromised. His comments on Tuesday that erased his positive comments on Monday started to compromise that moral authority that we need the president to have for this nation to be the beacon of light to all mankind.
Jeff, you're at the White House every day. You talk to White House officials about this. Are they just ignoring what their own party is saying about the president, or are they telling you things on background privately saying, well, we need to do something about this?
Well, and I was at Trump Tower last Tuesday when he did that controversial Q&A. I spoke to a senior official shortly after that, later on Tuesday, just kind of about that strategy or about their next steps, and he said talking is losing. So I think that their decision is absolutely just to kind of try not to talk about it anymore. That's why you didn't see people on the Sunday shows. We don't have a briefing today, which is probably because they want the president's remarks tonight to be to dominate the news. But it's also a strategy. It's let's not talk about this. Let's find a way to move on. Let's find a way to change the subject.
And clearly a huge moment for the president tonight. It comes at a time where his poll numbers are dropping substantially, even in some key states. Yesterday, NBC News and Marist put out a poll about how he's doing in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, states that the president often points to as helping propel him to the White House. Look at those approval, disapproval numbers, significantly underwater in each of those three key states. It really trends what he's facing nationally, too. Jonathan, if you're a Republican running for re-election, are you running away from the president at all costs at this point? Because at the same time, you need his voters to show.
Well, look at Ed Gillespie in Virginia across the Potomac. I mean, he's trying to pull off this balancing act where he criticizes what the president said about Charlottesville, but refuses to mention Trump's name because he doesn't want to unduly offend Trump's supporters. And he knows the second he mentions Trump's name, that's a whole new news cycle. And that clip is probably shown to Trump himself. And then you risk the possibility of a tweet war. And so that's the challenge, is that for some of these folks who are on the ballot this year or next year, you criticize what Trump said, but in some cases you either refer to him obliquely or not at all. But you just flash those three states on the screen. I mean, those are three states where you've got governor's races next year and Senate races next year. Those candidates on the ballot are not going to want to be connected to somebody whose numbers are in the mid-30s as of right now, and it could be worse next year.
And part of course, the criticism, too, that the president is facing are the things that he promised on the campaign trail that he did not fulfill so far as president, or seemingly taking a complete opposite stance. Today's decision on Afghanistan, we'll see what he says, but presumably it looks like an increase in troops could be in order. This is not what he promised on the campaign trail. Among the things that he said on the campaign trail that he has since backed off on, calling NATO obsolete, saying that that he would essentially get rid of NAFTA, building a wall along the border of Mexico, labeling China a currency manipulator, and also threatening to leave Afghanistan. But MJ, when you look at some of the things that some of Trump's supporters are saying, they're not necessarily holding him accountable for those decisions to essentially flip-flop. This is one Republican voter, quoted in the Boston Globe saying this: Trump is the only one standing up and saying what we think, and it's getting him in trouble. The ones that didn't vote for him are acting like little brats. Do you think that, at what point does the base say that, or look, you change your mind on some of these key decisions, I'm not going to support you anymore, or does it not matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think President Trump is always very, very aware of what are the desires of his base, his core supporters. And I think if you look at the polling that has come out in the last couple of weeks, the most troubling for him should be the fact that his numbers have started to dip among Republicans, and particularly non-college educated whites. Yeah. Those people were so core to bringing him across the finish line. And, you know, Julie, you were talking about the White House reset. I would just say that we should talk about that with a little bit of skepticism. You know, remember during the campaign, we used the word pivot. That became this dreaded word that we hashtag pivot, that we kept saying, look, we have said this and predicted this so many times, and that pivot never came. We have not gotten any real indication that President Trump is interested in any kind of a wholesale or fundamental reset, even with someone like Steve Bannon now being not at the White House. The president always, if he gets his way, and in the Trump White House he often does, he doesn't want a directional change. He always wants to be that last person to make the decision.
And we'll see what he says off script. Tonight will be on script. Of course, when he's off script, things often change for this president. But let's not also forget, today is the day, Eclipse Monday. Americans across the country are gearing up for the event of a